I would like to call the meeting to order. Thank you very much. This is the presentation of the 2023 budget. My name is Jeff Ducker. I'm the chairman of the Finance Committee. Thank you, Bob. I joined the Finance Committee in 2021, and I was called upon to replace the previous chair, Gail Wright, in the summer of last year. And I made the presentation last year for the 2022 budget. My background is I'm a CPA. I've been a CPA for far too many years I'd like to even mention. But for the last 25 of my practice, my focus was in auditing and advisory services to community associations. So I felt when my working days were over, so I thought I'd give back to the community with what I know. So therefore, that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to first, before we start, I'd like to thank, come on, Steve, you told me I just have to point it up there. Why isn't it moving? Got it. Okay. So this couldn't have been done without the help of a lot of people, the chairpersons of the various committees, our property management team, audiovisual Joe Flynn, Bistro Jerry Breslauer, Lifestyle L. Lassman and Charlotta Ferry, facilities Claire Litt, fitness Roberta Akonsky, grounds Michael Lacey, IT Joe Flynn and Miriam Parkinson, and recreation Ruth Halpern, and the VI board, most especially to the liaison to this committee, which was Mark Stave, who worked very closely with the chairman of the chairpersons of the various committees in reviewing their budgets and really made this thing work and move along. You see Miriam Parkinson's name up there. She really is an IT person, and without her help, this presentation, which we did through a Google Drive and was much more efficient in terms of preparing it and reviewing it, could not have been done. So I know, Miriam, you're out there listening, and I told you I acknowledge you and you deserve it. So thanks so much. Okay, Steve, help me out here. Okay, well, before we get to this, I want to just also thank the Finance Committee, which I'm very fortunate to have some great members and contributors to what we do. Al Gollner, Eli Hurwitz, Lou Myers, who's here, Gary Parkinson, Janet Vassell, and Herb Vickman. Thank you all. And the ex officio to the committee, our treasurer, Mark Lacatina, and as I mentioned before, the liaison, Mark Stave. And I'm really thankful that they spell their names differently, one with a K and one with a C, otherwise it would be real confusing. So without further ado, and before we get into the specifics of the budget, and that's going to be covered by funds, as you may have recalled from last year, there's two basic things I want to point out for the 2023 budget. Last year, we had a line item in the revenue section called 2021 operating surplus. And that was a carryover of the surplus from 21 that we put as a budget line item in 2022, which served to reduce the maintenance assessments. We did not do that this year for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're probably right at a break even for this year, and there's really no surplus to carry over. So that's not included in the 2023 budget. And the other significant increase, which is about 25% from last year, is the common reserves, which was in the low 700s or maybe 761. I'm not sure. Whatever 25% is to get it to 950, that's what it was last year. So a significant increase in the common reserve budget. And we'll see that when we get to the reserve section of the budget. Oh, and by the way, if you have any questions along the way, I'd appreciate it if you hold them until the end. We have ample time set aside for questions. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, consistent with generally accepted accounting principles for community associations, we use fund accounting, which requires three funds. The first one is the operating fund, which hopefully will come in here. I'm not sure why this, there we go. Operating fund, reserve fund, long-term debt fund. The majority of the presentation will concern the operating fund because that's where the largest portion of your maintenance assessments are. So, and what I'm going to do is take you through the 6 or 7 major sections of the budget. Within each of these sections, there's probably 20 or 25 accounts, specific line items in each of these sections. So we're not going to go through each of those because that would take too long and would be unproductive and really not all that meaningful because a lot of small numbers, a lot of numbers that didn't change that much. So the format is we're going to show you the 2022 budget, the projected 2022, and the 2023 budget. Now, the first thing I'm going to mention, which I mentioned earlier, is the projected is less than the budget for 2022 by about $100,000 and change. And the reason for that is, as I said earlier, there was $100,000 in last year's budget from the carryover of the 21 surplus. There's no revenue associated with that. So automatically you're going to have a $100,000 shortfall in that line item. But the purpose of the $100,000 was to decrease the maintenance last year. So that's the reason the project is a little low. The other reason the project is less than the budget is that lifestyle was down for 2022. But let's talk about the increases between 2022 and 2023. There's a 16% increase in insurance premiums, which quite frankly, we were expecting upwards to 21, 25%. And our agent came through for us and we've got very good coverage. So we only had a 16% increase. 14% increase in personnel costs due to replacement staff and increases for existing staff. A series of increases for audio visual and technical support, as well as a line item that we added this year for the first time. It's called an allowance for bad debt. And excuse me. And the reason we did that and the purpose of that is if we got every dollar collected on every dollar assessed, we'd be great. But that doesn't happen. So if you're short, you have to have a line item in your expense section so that the maintenance is actually increased by $50,000. And quite frankly, you could take the position as owners who pay timely that you're paying, if you will, your share of $50,000 for those people that are late payers and are ultimately potentially bad debts. But ladies and gentlemen, that's community association living defined. That's just the way it is. So to not have, we've got a few bucks in receivables. We're not in bad shape, but in order to be conservative and do the right thing, and in my practice, I don't think I've seen one budget that did not have a bad debt allowance. If we go along for the year, and the entry is going to be every month, there's going to be 1/12 of $50,000 as an expense. If it turns out that our receivables are in really good shape, we can stop expensing it mid-year or 2/3 through the year. But the budget right now calls for $50,000 for allowance for doubtful accounts, specifically for that purpose. Okay, utilities. Next time, there's about 5 or 6 items in here, including cable, electricity, water and sewer, et cetera. We have a 4% increase in the hot wire contract. We have a pretty substantial FP&L increase. So we increased the utilities budget by 20%, and we increased the water and sewer and reclaimed fees combined by 18%. So there's about an 8% increase in total in utility costs. I'm not here to judge whether that's good or bad. From my perspective as a resident, just like you are, I think that's in pretty good line. Grounds maintenance, including lakes. That increase is about 3% from 1.5 to 1,543 to 1,590. The reason for that is we've replaced our lake maintenance service contractor. That's about an 18% increase. And the top cut contract has a 2% increase effective mid-year. And that translates to just about a 3% increase for the year, 1,543 to 1,590. And the monthly cost per household for all landscaping, including common areas, your own, and lakes, is $167. So if you do the math, and I can only relate this to the last time I lived in a single family home, which was in 2013, single family, not part of an association. Back in 9 years ago, my guy was charging me $45 to cut my grass. And in the summer months, when he had to come 3 times a month, that's $135 just for my grass. So if you think about $167 for your grass, for the landscaping, for lakes, it's probably a bargain. Security, there's really no mention of any major increases because there's not. And once again, like to point out that the monthly security cost per house is $51. Think about what you'd have to pay for alarm maintenance if you live in a separate single family home outside of a community. Recreation reflects increase in costs for racket sports instructors, approximately $16,000, and a fitness instructor contract, approximately $10,000. We've added 3 courses. If you have any questions on this at the end of the presentation, Mark Stave is sitting right there. Right? Okay. Facilities maintenance, 136 to 151. We incurred more AC repairs this year than we had budgeted for. So we're budgeted 2023 to be more in line with the projected. And this is now a 22-year-old community. So we have going on 23. So we have an aging infrastructure. So this represents an 11% increase. Not too bad as far as I'm concerned. And don't forget, I'm sitting in the same boat that all you guys are, okay? I'm paying the increase just like everybody else. Lifestyle. That's down for one reason, primarily, is we've cut the costs, the mailing costs of the TOIL by approximately $10,000. That took effect this month for 2022 and will be in effect all year. So that's why there's a decrease in life. And this accounts for the, let's see, the salaries not in it. The salaries are in the G&A. But this budget was put together by Elle and by Charlotta with Mark's review. And I think we're pretty comfortable. We could have a burgeoning number this year if things, if things go well. The revenue will go up as well, as will the expenses, because a lot of the lifestyle expenses have a corresponding line item in the revenue section of our budget. So if we wind up spending more, we'll wind up making more. Bistro. That's about a 12% increase. And here's your reason. About a year ago, we started hearing rumblings about, why don't we have a fiscal year instead of a calendar year expiration for our bistro, because it gets crazy in December. Everybody's using up their script. There's all kinds of visitors coming in, and it's crazy in the bistro. So this was even before we switched operators, or maybe around the same time. A decision was made to change the year from a calendar year to a fiscal year, meaning June. It'll run from July to June, which you'll see in a little below. So there'll be 2 script periods, neither of which will roll over as they are not now. So in 23, you're going to have the second half of this script period, which is January 1st to June 30th. And that's 150 because that's one half of 300. And then from July through the following June, everyone will have a script of 360. So this 291, 690 is a blended number of the 300 and the 360. And it's going to run from July to June from now on. Total operating expenses, 5.8 million. An increase of 8.7% over 2022. Now, where else have you heard 8.7% recently in the news? The Social Security cost of living adjustment, right? So I'm not going to tell you whether or not we checked with the Social Security Administration or they called us. But amazingly enough, they both wound up 8.7. Maybe a coincidence, maybe not. No, I would say it's a coincidence. Okay, so that's the increase in our operating expenses. And if you look at the operating expenses graphically, and this is a dollar that you're spending, 77 cents of your dollar goes to utilities, grounds, and G&A. And then a little bit more for security. And the other small items aren't even mentioned because they're small. But 77% of your operating expenses are utilities, grounds, and G&A. Operating revenues, amazingly enough, same number, 5.847990. If they weren't and we missed it, I'd leave the room right now. But anyway, it all works out, folks. And I think I mentioned to you earlier where we have the projected revenues are short of the budget. That's because of that $100,000 that we put in the 2022 budget for the 2021 rollover. And again, this is the lion's share of your operating revenues, your maintenance assessments, bistro script and other revenue constitute, I don't know what, 10%, whatever that is. And at the end of the day, the operating maintenance assessment per quarter will be 1,771 compared to 1,598. Again, that's going to be the majority, thank goodness, of your quarterly assessment. So you'll see that number again towards the end. Okay. Now we have the reserve fund. Very important fund. When I was looking to move from Miami to Boynton Beach, I knew some of the folks at Castle through my business, and I made sure that I got a chance to see the financial statements to see that there were reserves set aside, and there were. Now, in those years leading up to maybe 2016, 17, from what we can tell in our historical analysis, the reserve funding was somewhat less than what the reserve studies called for. Not a lot less. I mean, I've seen boards that waive reserves entirely, or memberships that waive reserve. Board can waive reserves, either in condos or HOA. They have to propose a budget with reserves. But I've seen budgets cut in, reserve budgets cut in half, cut in thirds. You know, we were never doing that, even historically. But I'm telling you that because I want you to see what's taken place in the last 2 or 3 years. So last year, the total reserve contribution was $1,006,000. 2023, it's going to be $1,173,000. Slight reduction in the homes reserve because of some good contracts that were negotiated by our treasurer. The common areas that I mentioned earlier went up from 761 to 950. So the quarterly reserve contribution assessment is going from 317 to 370. Now the footnotes are important. Number 9. The 223 was in the reserve study. The reserve contribution of 950 was, I believe, 916 or 906. And the finance committee during September, or maybe it was even in August, we formed a subcommittee to look closely at the reserve expenses that were being, what's that? Thank you, Mark. What happened? It's over. Okay. Any Yankee fans in the audience or on Zoom? They won. Final score, Mark? 5-1. Way to go, Yankees. By the way, I'm from the Bronx, so I have a good reason to live to root for the Yankees. Okay. What high school? So we look closely at the 2023 expenses in particular, and we wound up adding about almost $250,000 of expenses that were not contemplated in the reserve study because we had some new information. Don't forget, the reserve study was done in March 2022, and we had some new information about the air conditioners, about the items related to land use, which can be taken from reserves, and a few other items. So we added 245 to the expenses, and we also revised the inflation rate, and we revised the interest rate that was proposed in the reserve study. And we did that through a software that was part of the package provided to us by the reserve study firm, Association Reserves. It's called UPlanet, Plan It, and it allows us to take their numbers and substitute or add or subtract or just tweak what they did based on certain parameters that we have. And as a result of that, the finance committee, with the approval of the subcommittee with the finance committee's approval, came up with a higher common area or pooled reserve number as a result of that. Also included in the additional expenses were $500,000 in 2024 and $500,000 in 2025 for, and I know there's a new name for it now, but what's referred to in the comment is as mosaic. So we just felt like whatever expenses we're going to have, if we can set aside a sizable amount in the reserve, that will reduce whatever else comes down the line. So that was not included in the reserve study by Association Reserves. They can't account for everything. By the way, Association Reserves, a little bit of quick history there, because I think that we had the meeting with them after last year's budget meeting. So in January of 2022, we interviewed 3 firms. And I may have told you this during the course of the year, but the other 2 firms were firms that I worked with in my practice for many years and were quality firms. But the Association Reserves presentation was so far superior to the others, not to mention the UPlanet and price. It was a very easy decision for the subcommittee, another subcommittee of my committee that chose them. And I know from my experience, a lot of the clients that I had use them. They're so accessible, and we're just really glad we made that decision. And they really know what they're doing. But again, it's our facility, so we took their numbers and upped them a little bit because of the information that we had. I don't know if you can see this. This is the result, the 30-year summary as a result of this subcommittee's work. The part of the reserve study ranks or rates our the strength of our reserve funding. If you can see in 2023, it's 28.7, which is close to medium. It still has a quote unquote a high percentage, if you will, of a high likelihood of a special assessment. I'm going to get to that in a minute. And there's another high down the line because we spend a whole bunch of money in 2026. We spend, if you look at the right-hand column, reserve expenses, there's 2.3 million spent in that year. So we go down to high again. But since we're increasing the contribution every year for the first 15 years, we get back into medium, and then we get up, then we get to the low for the last 20 years of the 30-year period. And you know, again, from my experience, and by the way, Will Simons, who's the president of Reserve Advisor, I'm sorry, pardon me, Freudian slip, of Association Reserves, told me, he says, if we felt because of your condition, the condition you were in, that you needed a special assessment, we would have mentioned that in the study. They're just doing the ranking based on the percentages. It's more of a global analysis, and he didn't feel like there was a need for a special assessment. And the other thing that's important to understand in terms of high versus medium is that, and I'm going to look at my notes for 1 second, is that it's more of a factor in a condominium association, because in condominium associations, you have events that take place that like, for example, the entire plumbing system fails and the whole building needs their plumbing system redone. An HOA, by definition, we're spread out. There's a lot of facilities that we can probably plan that we're going to need to improve. So the likelihood of a special assessment being high is more of an issue in a condominium association than a homeowners association. And that's from the mouth of the president of Association Reserves. And he's not just saying that to me because we're his client. I know this gentleman for a long time, and he's a straight shooter. Okay, the last fund is the long-term debt fund. Really not going to have to say much about this because it's the same number as it was last year. It's $157 a quarter. And the only difference is, and it will continue to be a difference each year as we go forward, of the $499,300, more goes to principal and less goes to interest each year as we go along. So that's the quarterly assessment for the long-term debt fund. The loan will mature in March 2029. Okay, summarize. 3 funds: operating, reserve, long-term debt. Here's we're paying a little over more than 75% of our maintenance fee for the operating fund. And here's the way it breaks down: 1771, 370, and 157 for a total of 2298 in the budget for 2023. That's about a 10.9% increase over last year. Mark, can you talk to the folks about what we've seen from the treasurers group from the various associations in the area?
Yes, so for the homeowners who aren't aware, there's a treasurers group that's made up of about 20, 25 treasurers who get together once a month. We share information, we share war stories. As you can imagine, this month, the war stories were about budgets. About half of the associations are increasing their quarterly assessment by 8% or more. A significant number of those were 10%. And in terms of reserves, we're seeing anywhere between a 10 and 40% increase in reserve funding. So what we're doing really is not that far out of line with what the rest of the communities in the area are seeing.
Thank you, Mark. So for those of you that are here, thank you for your attention. For those of you on Zoom, thank you for your attention. That concludes the formal portion of the presentation. And there should be a question mark showing up. It's not sure. There it is. So the floor is now open for questions. Okay, no questions from those in attendance? Ria?
I don't have any people raising their hand at the moment, so no questions on Zoom.
Okay, so in that case, I have the floor. I open the meeting. And if there are no questions, does anybody have an objection if I adjourn the meeting? I guess you don't have any objections. Therefore, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.